Hey, what's up, everybody, and welcome back to That Triathlon Show, the podcast presented by scientifictriathlon.com. I'm your host, Michael, and this episode is Q&A number 40. This is where I would usually ask you to send in questions for the Q&A episodes, but today what I want to ask you is instead to send in suggestions for how to improve the podcast. I always want to be improving and make it the best podcast experience, triathlon podcast experience that you have, or maybe even podcast experience in general. So if there's anything that you're missing that you'd like to see me add to the podcast, or anything that you would like to see trashed, any feedback is welcome. Constructive criticism, send any feedback that you have or suggestions to michael@scientifictriathlon.com, and that's Michael with a K. And I'll look through all of the responses that I get and get a feel for what the audience wants. And I can only implement the changes that I actually hear about. So if there are thousands of listeners out there that sit and think that I wish that you could only improve this little thing with the podcast, but nobody emails me, then I'm not going to know about it. So please do take this opportunity to send feedback and let me know. All right, before today's questions, big thanks to our sponsors, Precision Hydration. As I mentioned on a couple of episodes already, we are having a hydration Q&A coming up. I will record that with Andy Blow from Precision Hydration mid-July. So send in those questions that you have regarding hydration to michael@scientifictriathlon.com, and I will add them to the backlog for that episode, and we'll cover them in that upcoming hydration Q&A. In the meantime, as always, you can get your free and personalized hydration strategy on precisionhydration.com by taking their online sweat test. And if you want to try their products, use the promo code ThatTriathlonShow, all one word, all caps, and that'll give you your first box or tube of electrolyte product for free. And thank you to Roka, the brand that redefines the standard in wetsuits, dry suits, eyewear, and several other triathlon and endurance sports product lines. I use and love many of Roka's products. In particular, the Maverick X wetsuit is a favorite of mine, as is the Gen 2 Elite Aero tri-suit. I also use the Simpro 2 buoyancy shorts a lot, and I use the R1 goggles, SL1 sunglasses, and their Aviator sunglasses. So whatever you are looking for, you can go onto roka.com and get a fantastic 20% discount on your entire order with the promo code TTS, all caps. All right, first question for today. Steve in the United Kingdom writes, Michael, firstly, great podcast. Keep it up. Second, I have a question. I recently qualified for Nice 7.3 Worlds, and belatedly, this has now become my primary target for the season. Before qualifying, I had already entered Ironman UK, which is 8 weeks before Nice, and the National Middle Distance Championships 3 weeks before Nice. Can you think of any way to utilize either or both of these two races as part of my preparation for Nice? For example, go hard on the swim and first half of the bike before easing right off and cruising home? Or would I be better off just doing a 9-week training block and not racing either? I suspect that solid training has a greater performance benefit than racing, when the tapering and recovery, which are necessarily a part of middle and long distance racing, are taken into account. How do I judge how much recovery is necessary after a long race? In my hands, HRV doesn't seem to be all that sensitive. Steve, thank you for your question. It's a very good one. So let's tackle Ironman UK first. As I record this, we're just a bit more than 3 weeks out from that race. I have an athlete racing there, so I know that pretty well. To be totally honest, I can't think of any scenario where a full Ironman would be good preparation for anything other than potentially another Ironman. But even that, I think, would be at a fairly unique level of performance. Like you have the Cam Worths of the world. Really, we're thinking professional athletes here that can race Ironman, and they have the genetics gifts to recover really, really quickly from that sort of thing. I would not recommend you, nor anybody, to be honest, not even Cam Worth, if I was coaching him, to race an Ironman in preparation for a 7.3 race that is the most important goal. So that's the key here. You have identified that the 7.3 Worlds is your goal race. And with that in mind, Ironman UK that will not be ideal preparation no matter what you do. For Ironman UK especially, let's consider the course. It's a very tough course, so it is a brutally long day out and there's no hiding in that race. It will require a significant amount of recovery, even if you cruise home. Especially the run is what makes a lot of damage when you're running 42 kilometers. So if Nice is the main goal, my recommendation is to not do Ironman UK. Simple as that, really. As for half distance nationals, it can definitely work to do that 3 weeks before Nice. The question then becomes, is it ideal? Again, considering that you have identified the 7.3 Worlds as your primary goal. If I were coaching you, I would probably not recommend taking the risk of racing half distance nationals 3 weeks before if you consider that the 7.3 Worlds is considerably more important. Instead, what I would do is at some other point, I would try to race 2 half Ironmans in relatively close proximity and see how you do with that sort of schedule. So whether you can actually use the first race to get fitter for the second race and perform better in the second race. Because for many athletes, and I include age group athletes there, that's what happens. But trying something new like that out when the stakes are high, like you have 7.3 Worlds coming up, that's not necessarily ideal if that is indeed your main goal. So I would try that too close half Ironmans in close proximity. I would try that tactic out when you have some lower key races going on. All that being said, for yours and all the listeners' additional benefit and speaking generally, I think that racing a half Ironman 3 weeks before a goal half Ironman, a more important goal half Ironman, can be completely fine, even if it's not necessarily always better than training. Whether it's better, that's really where, again, you have to do this test yourself in a low stakes scenario and see what works for you. And every listener has to do that because it can be quite individual. But with the right training structure leading up to that first race and between the first and the second race, it does not have to be much worse than the alternative of, or any worse than the alternative of just training through that, or training until that second key race and skipping the first race. It does not have to be worse than that alternative either. So what you might consider if you want to give this sort of thing a go is to not really taper much for that first event, that is, let's call it a B race, and just train through it basically, or just give it a short mini taper. So take 2 or maybe 3 easy days before that race, and that will maximize the amount of training that you can do before that first race. Because then you are absolutely right that you cannot shortchange the recovery after your race. You will need that. How much? That is very individual. I would start to do some active recovery training the day after a race. Absolutely. That's absolutely recommended. And then just do a little training every day, a little running, a little cycling, a little swimming, and slowly but surely start to feel your legs, your muscles recover, your body recover, start to feel that maybe you get that oomph back in your swim stroke and in your running stride and your pedal stroke on the bike. So just take it day by day. Give it a go every now and then with doing some strides on the run, some short sprints on the swim and the bike to just see how your body responds to that higher intensity, but without taxing your body. You just have to be confident in taking that recovery. So you have to keep that training load after the event low and know that is at the end of the day going to be much better than the alternative. So potentially what you can do is that in the middle week between those 2 races, if the races are 3 weeks apart, you might be recovered enough to do quite a bit of volume and quality in that week. But if you have to take the early part of that week as an easy training period, then you do that. There's no point trying to do hard, high volume training if your body is clearly telling you that it's not recovered. And you mentioned HRV. I think HRV can work well, but it's not the be-all, end-all. By any means, the be-all, end-all is to tune into your body, listen to what it's telling you and how it's reacting to the training, to the small tests, the strides, the sprints that I just talked about, and assess where you are. Do you feel recovered? Do you feel ready to do, maybe not go right into your biggest and hardest sessions, but try a shorter sweet spot workout or something like that? Do you feel ready? When you feel ready, chances are that you are actually ready. I don't want to give any specific guidelines for the time course because it is so individual at the end of the day. It can be a few days. It can be a couple of days. For some athletes, it's ridiculously fast. For some athletes, it can easily be 2 weeks from 17.3. So there's just too wide a range to give specific guidelines on that. So assess your body state physically, but also your mental state, your motivation to get back training. That tells a lot when you're ready to get back into your normal training. Another thing that I want to point out about why you don't need to worry too much about losing training because of having a B race in the lead up to a race is that actually when you are doing your normal training, you do need to have recovery at some points in that training program anyway. So for example, let's say you do two hard weeks, 2 weeks of pretty high volume and some intensity in there, then at some point you need to take a few days of very low training load. So it might be 2 weeks, it might be 3 weeks, but at some point you need those days of low training load to adapt to that training and recover and get ready for the next block. So if you structure your program cleverly, then that B race that could come at the end of a 2 to 3 week building block with a high training load. And in that situation, even if you weren't to do the race, then some easier training would have followed. So with the race, the only thing that changes is that maybe you need a bit more recovery, a few more days, sure. But if we say that the average recovery amount that is needed after 7.3 might be 1 week or so, then it won't be that much additional recovery compared to what you might have had otherwise. And if you actually do the race flat out and you recover well, then you might get that great supercompensation effect. There is such a thing as racing yourself into fitness, and it's not a myth or anything. So if you look at it that way, you see that a build-up race, a half Ironman as a build-up race, is not necessarily super costly. It can actually be more beneficial than the alternative, especially if you don't worry about tapering into that race, because then you don't lose any training before the race, only after. So to sum up, there are ways to structure your training so that a half Ironman 3 weeks before another half Ironman can act as great preparation. But it's best to try this with a slightly less important second event so that you know more clearly how much recovery you need and how you should structure the training in between those races. So for you in this scenario, perhaps the better bet would be to focus on the training as you suggest, and maybe find an Olympic or two that you can do through that training block. One more comment. I would say that if you are going to enter a national championship event, then you should never hold back. You are in the national championships, you go for it, man. Go there, race as fast as you can. I think it's important to respect the race and the rest of the field as well by going there to race if you go to a national championship event. So that's a final comment that I have about your question, and then you just adjust the recovery accordingly. That's what you need to do. All right, thank you again for your question, Steve. The next one is from Todd in Tennessee, the United States. And Todd asks, when would you ride a road bike during a triathlon? So for example, would you consider a road bike for Ironman 7.3 Worlds in Nice? So you notice a theme here. There are a lot of Ironman 7.3 Worlds questions with that race coming up in, I believe, 11 and a half weeks or so by the time of this recording. By the time you hear this, it might be 10 and a half weeks. Either way, basically how I would go about it is I would do some calculations. So for example, I can estimate that, do a crude estimate that on flat and rolling terrain, I go about 3 kilometers per hour faster on my triathlon bike than on my road bike. And you, of course, need to assess what this number is for you. So let's take 2 example speeds here. Let's take on the road bike, with the road bike as a baseline. Let's take 40 kilometers per hour and 30 kilometers per hour. So if I go 40 kilometers per hour on the road bike and 43 on the tri bike for a distance, let's call it 10 kilometers. And remember, this is flat or rolling terrain, like moderately rolling, like not too big hills or anything like that, but it doesn't have to be pancake flat either. That means that I'm doing that 10 kilometer segment 1 minute 2 seconds faster on the tri bike than the road bike. This difference grows, of course, if I go slower at 30 kilometers per hour on the road bike versus 33 kilometers per hour on the tri bike. The difference is 1 minute 48. So that's just to give you some perspective and some reference. And now, obviously, if you have 20 kilometers in total of that sort of flattish or gently undulating road, then you'll just have to multiply those time gains. So if it were the 40 versus 43 kilometer per hour scenario, and we have 20 kilometers as part of a race that is flat-ish terrain, then it would be 2 minutes and 4 seconds that I save by having the tri bike. Just based on this, remember, this is a very crude estimate here, going 3 kilometers per hour faster on my tri bike. That's just my sort of gut feel. Now, what you need to ask yourself is, and assess and maybe test, is that based on that, the amount of flattish and undulating road in a particular race, on a particular race course, and how quickly you are likely to ride them. So if your speed on the road bike would be 35, then you would take that as your calculation speed. If it's 25, then you take 25, etc. So you calculate how much time you save with the tri bike on those flatter segments. And now you assess how likely are you to make up that time on the ascents and the descents of the course with a road bike versus tri bike, because chances are that you will be as fast or faster on the road bike versus tri bike on those climbs and descents. Now, there is an argument, a fairly good argument, and there are people that are much more well-versed in this than me, like, for example, the Flow guys, John and Chris Fornham, who I've had on in a past episode. There is an argument that in almost any triathlon in the world, the added weight of a tri bike compared to the road bike is a very small factor. The weight isn't really that big a factor when it comes to how much faster you go on the climbs. So theoretically, you don't really need to, if we take a theoretical example and we only use calculations here, then I wouldn't really calculate that weight difference. I wouldn't take that into account in the calculations here. However, there is a fairly good chance that you can either push more power when climbing on a road bike, or just use that power more effectively due to your position on the bike. So I think that this is really a case for actually doing some testing out on the road with the tri bike and the road bike. Go to some local hills and compare how much power can you push on each bike up a given segment. So say you have a hill that is roughly 5 minutes. You go as hard as you can for 5 minutes or up that hill on the road bike, and then you do it again on the tri bike, probably on separate days. That's what I would do at least. And you see if there is a significant difference in how much power you can actually produce. Now, the second thing you need to do is to time how fast can you go up that segment for a fixed power. So let's say your race pace, your race power. So settle into that power on the road bike and go up that segment and see how fast you went, and same thing on the tri bike. And that information will of course be very, very insightful for you and give you an idea of how much time you might save on the climbs on the course. So that's where you need to sit down and see, well, how long are the climbs in the race that I'm doing compared to the climb that I did, and how steep are they? What's the time that I'm going to be out on those climbs going to be roughly, and how can I extrapolate those findings that I just found in my test, and what might that translate to on the race course. And actually, a great thing that you can do then is that you can use a tool like Best Bike Split and load that course that you're going to do into Best Bike Split, and just add your two bikes. And to have two separate bikes, you would need to have a premium account, but it's well worth it to, even if you just buy it for a month as you do this test, you might even be able to have a free trial for a month, and so you might not need to pay anything. Either way, you can use a tool like Best Bike Split, add your two bikes, your road bike and your tri bike, and that course, and then you can actually compare different segments. So you can see just that climbing segment based on your road bike and your tri bike, and the same sort of power, what theoretically would be the difference in time. But also make sure that you don't let these computer simulations override your findings that you found in the practical experiment. I'd also argue that then potentially the largest gains on a hilly course for the road bike would actually come from being able to descend tricky descents better. This, of course, assumes that the descents are actually a bit tricky and challenging, and not just very gentle, straight descents where you can just zoom down on your tri bike. But if there is any technical descending in your goal race, then being able to go on the road bike should, for most people, allow them to go more aggressively without as much braking. And this is, again, a place where you really need to go out and test some local descents. Ideally, of course, ones that represent the kind of descents that you might face on race day. Test them on both bikes and see how much faster you can go on one bike versus the other. Because maybe if the descents aren't very curvy, they are fairly straight, they're not that steep, so you feel comfortable going fast and going in the aero bars all times and holding your position, then you might be a lot faster on a tri bike. So that's something that you simply need to try. Now, with this knowledge in mind of how much faster or not you might be climbing and descending on the road bike compared to the tri bike, then compare that with the amount of time that you gained on the flat courses of the race and make an informed decision on which option to go with. So the assessment here, the review to decide which bike to go with, it includes both theoretical but also practical testing. As for the specific race that you're racing, Nice 7.3 Worlds, I'm also racing that, but I haven't done this preparation myself yet, which I realized when I was answering your question. So it was an interesting thing, actually, that you brought it up. So I checked the bike course. Nice has around 25 kilometers of pretty much pancake flat or very gently undulating riding. And so, for example, for me personally, I calculated that if I ride at 43 kilometers per hour on my tri bike on those pancake flat sections instead of 40 kilometers per hour on the road bike, I save 2.5 minutes in total on those flat segments. I feel pretty good about my climbing skills on the tri bike. I don't think I would lose much time compared to the road bike. But actually, considering the descents, and I need to be honest, I haven't checked the course carefully enough yet to give you a clear answer on what I'm going to do even. But if the descents are tricky, I think that I do know that I'm a much better descender on the road bike. I'm a pretty good descender on the road bike, not as comfortable on the tri bike, definitely not. So I can tell you that I will definitely go out and test this and test my descending skills on the road bike versus the tri bike. And so I thank you for your question also for me personally, because this opened up my eyes to the fact that I need to go out and do this testing myself. Because if there is a chance that all that descending that is available on the Nice course, that would allow me to save actually as much as 2.5 kilometers, especially if I save even a little bit going up the road bike rather than the tri bike up the hills, which, I mean, yeah, I should save a little bit of time. I'm not saying that you don't save anything. I'm just saying that weight isn't as important as some other factors, at least not when you consider that the difference in weight might be 2 kilograms or something like that at most if you have a heavier tri bike. So that's my recommendation. By the way, if you find that you are going to use a road bike, definitely use clip-on aero bars so that you can make the most of those flat segments as well and go as fast as possible on them and maybe bridge the gap compared with the speed that you would be doing on the tri bike. Also, one more suggestion. So I mentioned that 3 kilometer per hour difference, that was a bit of a, not wild guess, but a guesstimate from me. So what you can do is you can use Best Bike Split or a website like gribble.org. So to get better numbers for how much faster you might be going for a given power on the tri bike versus the road bike. So for example, I used gribble.org to prepare for this question. And if I add in a 75 kilogram rider with a 10 kilogram bike and a CDA of 0.3, which might be the road bike, and 0.25 on the tri bike, and they are pedaling at 250 watts, they would go from 36.9 kilometers per hour on the road bike to 39.3 on the tri bike. So that's just south of a 2.5 kilometer per hour difference. So I wasn't that far off actually with that 3 kilometer per hour estimate. Either way, thank you so much for your question, Todd, and good luck in Nice. And by the way, I just sent you the analysis and the report from your inside testing, so I hope that will also be useful for you in preparation in these last 11 weeks or whatever we have left when you hear this. The last question, this one came in from Instagram, so a quick tiny nudge to go and follow us on Instagram, where we now have an official account at Scientific Triathlon HQ. And this question is from Lashy in Australia, who writes, what are your views on making up calories after big days where you can't meet caloric demands? Okay, I have quite a lot to say on this, maybe too much. So bear with me. It's a great question. The balance of training, rest, and nutrition is actually an area that I'm currently focusing on educating myself in a lot. That this is like really where I'm putting my self-education time. There is some really fascinating stuff out there. I'm still getting my thoughts and notes together and talking with some very knowledgeable people, but count on hearing more about this topic in a not too distant future, I would say. Either way, what I can tell you right now is that I would not make up calories later. I would definitely make sure that you actually meet caloric demands, no matter how hard it may seem. Because if you're not, you might not be getting the adaptations that you want. To give some context to the listeners that probably don't know this, Lashley is a professional triathlete. And from what I can tell from seeing your pictures on Instagram, you're not very heavy. Let's make some very rough estimates of what your caloric expenditure during a big day might be. Let's say you swim for 1 hour 30 and call that 1,000 calories. You bike for 5 hours and we call that 4,000 calories, 800 per hour. And you run for an hour and a half and we call that 1,200 calories. And let's estimate that your non-exercise related caloric expenditure is 2,500 calories per day. That would mean that you have to get in 8,700 calories during that day to replace the calories that you lost. And that makes sense. Recall that Michael Phelps was famous for getting in 10,000 calories per day. Of course, he's much bigger than you, so his basal metabolic rate would be much bigger, and his expenditure in workouts as well, although swimming burns slightly less than for example running. So that also compensates for it. And with a big day like this, that would be a 5-hour ride and 2 1.5 hour workouts, a swim and a run. That's 8 hours of training. So 8,700, it makes sense that that's how much you have to consume, and at the power output that you're producing as well as a professional athlete. And we're not just talking power on the bike, but it's power on the swim and power on the run. You have the capacity to produce great powers, to mobilize a lot of energy and use that to propel you forward in all the three disciplines. That means that a lot of energy is consumed and used by the body, and you just have to replace it. So for the listeners that may be shocked by hearing this 8,700 calories per day, you have to do your own math. This doesn't apply to you specifically, these numbers, although the same concepts, they do apply to you. So 8,700 calories, that is challenging, and unless you really make it a point to fuel diligently in your workouts. So for a big day like this, for somebody like you, I would tell you to fuel as much as possible in the workouts themselves, even if you don't feel you need to. For example, in that first morning swim, go and listen to episode 40 of the podcast, Race Day Fueling and the Core Diet with Jesse Kropolnicki. Jesse talks about trying to get half of your workout expenditure in during the workout itself. I think that would be great. On a big day, it would be great to do that for sure. I would definitely support that if you were to do that. I think that it's difficult though, and perhaps not realistic to expect you to jump to that level of energy consumption during your workouts. So I would say try to get in at least a third of your caloric expenditure, or let's call it a third on the swim and the run, and a bit more than a third on the bike. So because it's just so easy to eat on the bike. It's a rolling buffet, as we all know. So during the swim, you can get in a bit more than 300 calories. So that would be, for example, roughly 1 liter of sports drink off the top of my head, and 400 calories on the run. So that would be a third of 1,200. That would be, for example, 4 gels. And on the bike per hour, you would try to get in 300 to 350 calories per hour. So close to that 50%, which would be 400 calories per hour in this example. So for example, we'll go for 4 gels actually, and that will bring you up to that 50%. Let's go for that. That leaves you with around about, and I've done these calculations in advance, I'm not very good at doing math in my head, 6,200 calories that you still need to consume in your daily nutrition. So you got in 2,500 only during your workouts. That could fuel a pretty large person for their just basal needs without any training. So that's quite a lot, but you still have a long way to go after eating all of that and drinking all of that. in your swimming, biking, and running. So definitely, before anything, start the day with a big 1,000 plus calorie breakfast, and have another even bigger meal after that swim, so 1,500 calories or something like that. And this actually isn't that difficult when you start to calculate how much calories you get in from various things. I would go for something like oatmeal or Bircher muesli, something that I'm eating a lot right now, getting a ton of good fiber and carbohydrate, and adding in fruit, berries, and some healthy fats, maybe like nuts and seeds or nut butters. Make sure you get some good protein, maybe eggs. You can make scrambled eggs with wedges to get a head start on your veggie consumption for the day. Or it could be Greek yogurt, or it could be scrambled eggs and Greek yogurt. And in that Greek yogurt, you might again mix in some fruits and berries or things like that. So, and you might also have something in your beverage like orange juice to drink or something like that. And of course, coffee. That you have to have coffee if you're going to go out for a big day. I'm just going on and on here and getting really hungry actually as I do this. But just to give you suggestions and examples, you could have some whole grain bread with nut butter and banana. There are just so many options, and 1,000 calories adds up rather quickly, which is a good thing for you. And then after that 1,000 and 1,500 calorie meal that you would have around the swim, that leaves you with 3,700 calories left to consume after your, let's assume it's a long bike with a run off the bike. So definitely start with a recovery shake plus a big late lunch once you get in from that workout. I don't know when you get started working out, but you might get in for a late lunch at 4 or something with a big day like that. So include veggies in that lunch, because on big training days, it's quite easy to forget to have your veggies, so make sure that you do get that. But also, of course, that you get a lot of calories. So something in the region of 1,500 to 2,000 calories for that meal, including the recovery shake immediately after, and then the meal itself is what I would consume. Because remember, you've at this point been cycling for 5 hours and running for an hour and a half. If you find it difficult to get this from the recovery drink and the food, then go for that dessert, man. Seriously, you would deserve it and need it at that point. And then after that meal, you might have some healthy snack later on, maybe a smoothie made with veggies and fruit and some protein powder of, let's say, 500 to 600 calories. And then a dinner later on, a late dinner at 7:30, 8 o'clock of around 1,000 or slightly more calories. Do not concern yourself with eating late at this point. It's much more important. It would be much more detrimental to not get in the calories that you lost than to be concerned with eating late and whatever tiny disadvantages you might have from that. So it is a lot of eating, but we're talking 8 hours of training here at very high energy outputs at the level of training that you're at. So I want to reiterate the reason why this is so important. And the reason is supercompensation. When you do a massive day of training, you impose a big stress on the body, and the body reacts by trying to adapt to that stress with processes like muscle protein synthesis, cardiovascular and respiratory adaptations, mitochondriogenesis and other cellular adaptations. But, and this is a big but, if the body is in starvation mode or in low energy availability, that will cause a complete or partial shutdown of processes that are not deemed as essential as just pure survival and energy conservation. And becoming a faster triathlete, as much as we might think it is, it's certainly not one of those essential, vital processes in the mind of the body, at least. So that supercompensation process and the adaptations that you are after, those require that you actually recover with nutrition, with fuel as well, and have that energy on board. Otherwise, the body won't be able to adapt to the stress that you just impose on it. The other factor here is glycogenesis, so the synthesis and restorage of glycogen in your body. That's a process that takes 24 to 48 hours, even with proper fueling. So if you don't adequately replace your calories, and importantly replace carbohydrate after a big training day, then instead of it taking you 1 to 2 days to go through that glycogenesis, it will take you 2 to 3 days. So you either lose a day of potentially decent training, or worse, you try to do training that you're not metabolically ready for because your glycogenesis process is still ongoing and you don't have glycogen stores on board to do that training. And that means that you don't get the adaptations that you want from that training either. And that can be the start of a slippery slope and a bad circle of training on and on in metabolically suboptimal states and not having the quality in training that you could have had, or not getting the desired adaptations from the training because of that. And at some point, if worst case scenario, this could lead to illness or to chronic fatigue or to overtraining. Lastly, I have an interesting paper or document that I'll email you with some additional reading that is sort of related to this topic, partially related, overlapping. I know you will find it very interesting. So look forward to an email from me very soon, and please email me if I forget, because I'll wait until this episode is released to do that, so it makes more sense in the context. All right, that's a wrap for today. I'll link in the episode description to some tools that I mentioned, Best Bike Split and Gribble.org, which is another bike sort of speed, power, aerodynamics calculator that you can use for free. And to the episode that I just mentioned in the last question, Race Day Fueling and the Core Diet with Jesse Kropelnicki, episode 40. That's one of the best liked episodes that I've done. I get emails to this day of people saying that episode completely changed their view on fueling and nutrition in triathlon. If you're new to the podcast and new to Scientific Triathlon, just a quick reminder here of the products and services that we offer on scientifictriathlon.com. We have ready-made training plans for sprint through Ironman distances, customized training plans, customized to you. And we have individual coaching, although I should say that both myself and James are at capacity at the moment. We do have a waiting list though, so you can join that and get notified if slots become available. And then we have the Inside testing service, which is a sort of critical power testing protocol that essentially turns your power meter into a laboratory and gives you complete insight into your physiology. And that, by the way, will tell you how much energy and how much carbohydrate you expend on those big days so that you can adjust your nutrition and your carbohydrate intake accordingly. Some other house cleaning items, as mentioned, remember to follow us on Instagram at Scientific Triathlon HQ. And also, since we had sort of a 70.3 words themed episode today, any listeners that are participating there and that might be interested in a meetup or something in Nice, send me an email, michael@scientifictriathlon.com, and let me know. And we'll see if we can put something like that together. It would be kind of fun, I think. Big thanks finally to our sponsors, Precision Hydration. Take their free online sweat test and use the promo code ThatTriathlonShow, all one word, all caps, to get your first box or tube for free. And thank you to Roka. Go and check out their wetsuits, tri-suits, swimskins, goggles, and high-performance eyewear, and use the promo code TTS, all caps, to get 20% off your entire order. Thank you, as always, for listening. Keep training smart and keep loving triathlon.